Now one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burden. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Notice that he's very clear about who he is. He's not an Egyptian. He knows that he's a Hebrew. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and he hid him in the sand. And so what happened? Well, it turned out somebody was watching him after all, and eventually the Pharaoh heard about it, and Moses had to run away. So he left, he fled, and he wound up in Midian, where he wound up meeting a Midian priest and marrying his daughter, with whom he had one son. But we have this sudden shift now. Moses, who was apparently growing up, a kind of prince within the castle or within the Pharaoh's family, is now a shepherd, and he's alienated from Pharaoh, who has threatened to kill him once he found out that Moses attempted to kill one of the Egyptians. So Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, who was the priest in Midian, and he led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. Moses looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Notice that God doesn't actually start this conversation. Not really. God waits. God saw that he had turned aside to see. When God saw this, then God called out to Moses. So you've got a kind of an interesting situation here. It could just be Moses' curiosity, that's what he says, but he appears to be receptive or open to the presence of God. He appears to recognize the presence of God in a way where God then feels, God then responds. But God's there, God's present, but perhaps not everyone would have turned aside to see. Perhaps not everyone would have recognized that this was an important, an unusual, a magnificent sight of some sort, that there was something here that needed attention, right? So God calls to him, and Moses says, Here I am. And then God says, Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You can't get too close to God. Moses gets a lot closer to God than anybody else, but even Moses is going to hide his face. There, to look on God is a very dangerous thing. So the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. Remember that this is the same God who heard the weeping of Ishmael. Remember when Ishmael is lying there out in the desert, his mother, Hagar, has set him aside because she can't stand to watch him die of thirst. Ishmael is weeping, and God heard his cries. So it's not just Moses who's alert and awake and listening. God is alert and awake and listening. So he says, I knew their sufferings, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The cry of the Israelites has now come, and I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses said to God, Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you. Now, this is kind of interesting, right? Because theoretically, at least, Moses grew up in the Pharaoh's household, right? A grandson in some sense, right? Adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter. And yet, he doesn't seem to have there's no hint of that in this conversation here. Not only that, but he also says nothing about the fact that he had to run away because Pharaoh wanted to kill him, right? Again, we see different threads of this story, I think, woven together here in a way that makes it not hold together terribly well as a narrative directly, the way we would expect a novel to hold together, for example. Right? But this is different than that. God said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. And so Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask, what's his name? Which God is this? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me, Moses, to you. And this is my name forever, my title for all generations. I am who I am. It can also be translated in other ways. It can be translated as I will be what I will be, or I am who I am. But notice that whichever of these translations you use, what you've got here is a verb. You've got the verb of being itself. Now there's an interesting theological idea. God's name is being. I am. I will be. So go, says the Lord, and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared, has given heed to you, to what has been done to you in Egypt, and he will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, a land flowing with milk and honey. So Moses, still unnerved, said, but suppose they don't believe me or listen to me. But they say to me, the Lord did not appear to you. Why should they believe me? So the Lord said to Moses, what is that in your hand? Moses said, a staff. And the Lord said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moses drew back from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and seize it by the tail. So he reached out his hand, and he grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand. And this, said the Lord, is so that they will believe that you have seen the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Right? So God is preparing Moses to go into Pharaoh's court, where Pharaoh has a bunch of magicians, as we shall see. This is a kind of an odd thing. This is a kind of tricks. He's giving Moses tricks that he can use to persuade people that he has power, that he has unusual powers, right? And if the business with the staff and the snake doesn't work, he's got another one here. Put your hand inside your cloak, says the Lord. And so Moses put his hand into his cloak. And when he took it out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. God said, put your hand back in your cloak. He put his hand back. When he took it out, it was restored. Now, if they do not believe you or heed the first sign, they may believe this second one. And if they do not believe even these two signs or heed you, well, then here's a third one. You shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. He's got 3 signs that he can use. But Moses is not convinced. This is not going to be enough. He says, I'm just not suited for this job. You've got the wrong guy here, right? My Lord, says Moses, I have never been eloquent. I can't speak to power here, neither in the past nor even now. that you've spoken to your servant? I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. The Lord said to him, well, I think the Lord's getting a little impatient now. Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what you're to speak. But Moses is still not convinced. Lord, please send somebody else. And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, all right, what of your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he's coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you what you shall do. He indeed shall speak for you to the people. He shall serve as the mouth for you, and you shall serve as God for him. Take in your hand this staff with which you shall perform the signs. Then Moses and Aaron went, and they assembled all the elders of the Israelites. And Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and performed the signs in the sight of the people. The people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had given heed to the Israelites, and that he had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they said, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, so that they may celebrate a festival to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. I will not let Israel go. He continued, now they are more numerous than the people of the land, and yet you want them to stop working. That same day Pharaoh commanded the supervisors, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as before. Let them go, gather straw for themselves, but do not diminish the number of bricks they must make, for they're lazy. That's why they cry, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on them. Then they will labor at it and pay no attention to these deceptive words. So the supervisors of the people went out and they said, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. So go and get straw yourselves wherever you can find it. And the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. But their taskmasters were urgent, saying, complete your work, the same daily assignment as when you were given a straw. And the supervisors of the Israelites were beaten and were asked, why did you not finish the required quantity of bricks yesterday and today, as you did before? Then the Israelite supervisors came to Pharaoh, and they cried, why do you treat your servants like this? No straw is given to your servants, yet they say to us, make bricks. The Israelite supervisors saw that they were in trouble when they were told, you shall not lessen your daily number of bricks. Now as they left the Pharaoh, they came upon Moses and Aaron, who were waiting to meet them. They said, Lord, look upon you and judge. You have brought us into bad odor with Pharaoh and his officials, and you have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Poor Moses turned again to the Lord. Lord, why have you mistreated this people? Why did you ever send me? Since I first came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's mistreated this people. And you have done nothing at all to deliver your people. Say to the Israelites, says the Lord, I am the Lord, and I will free you from the burdens of the Egyptians and deliver you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Notice the I will free, I will redeem, I will take, all verbs. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has freed you from the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession, for I am the Lord.